Hello everyone and welcome to Project Management. My name is Paul Tilley and today we're looking at Unit 1, Introduction to Project Management. The resources for this will come from Module 1, which is the course itself, which you will find in the D2L. In Part A of the unit, we're going to look at the concept of modern project management. This involves developing an understanding of what project management is and why project management is critical to today's world. We're going to also distinguish a project from a routine operation. We're going to identify different stages of the project life cycle. We're going to understand that managing projects involves really balancing technical issues with social cultural dimensions of the project. Here I have a map of where we're going with this. So this is effectively, we're starting on the left and working our way to the right. So we're going to look at why project management, we're going to define what a project is, we're going to look at the key characteristics of a project, the constraints affecting a project, how we manage a project, and in terms of managing, we're looking at the project management framework from the point of view of stakeholders, key knowledge areas, tools and techniques, how we measure success. And we're going to look at finally the role of the project manager and the project manager skills. So, what is project management? Well, project management, very simply, is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and various techniques to project activities to meet project requirements, getting the job done. We have lots of examples of projects that have been in the news over the last number of years that you have to think to yourself now, if you are the project manager, what knowledge would you need? What skills would you need to bring to the table? What tools could be used? What are some of the techniques? And how do we really measure the success of that? You think of things like Muskrat Falls. That was a project. It is almost finished and hopefully produce electricity, but it's been in the news for some of the challenges that project has faced. Likewise, the Boeing 737 MAX. Boeing brought that new plane to the market. They had some problems with it, a couple of crashes, several people died. Many people died, as a matter of fact, and they had to go back to the drawing board and rework part of the system on that. That was a project. We saw some of the challenges with that project. The Phoenix pay system that the federal government implemented to be able to pay public service employees, it has been a catastrophe. And, we think about that as a project, what knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques would have been brought to that in order to make it more successful. When we think of projects too, we got to think that many organizations assert that using project management techniques provide those key advantages that we need. You got better control of financial, physical, and human resources, improved customer relations, shorter development times, lower costs, higher quality, higher profit margins, better internal coordination, positive impacts of meeting strategic goals, and higher worker morale. Overall, planning, which is really what the front end of project management is about, helps us deliver a better quality product that allows us to reap the benefits of that product. If we ask what a project management is, I have a little video put into the slides here. I'm not going to play it within this document, but within the slides, please take a look at what exactly is project management. This is a short little video that kind of explains it very well. If we think about a project, we've got to think about it, how's it different? Well, a project tends to have some unique characteristics. It's usually a new process or product, which leads to uncertainty, the fact that it's new. It usually has one key objective: let's get this project complete. It's a one-shot, limited life. It's not happening. It's not a recurring thing. It's a one-of. People tend to be coming at this from various perspectives, engineering, marketing, so heterogeneous, meaning that there's many people involved from many disciplines. Systems must be created in order to integrate all that. How do we get those people to talk to one another? There's great uncertainty of performance, cost, schedule, a lot of unknowns. It's outside the major duties of the organization. What does the organization do? If it makes airplanes, this is a specific deal of making a particular airplane. We're used to repetitive copies, not one-offs, that sort of thing. If you're Boeing, or it's not every day that Newfoundland Hydro or Nalcor, as they're called, builds a large hydroelectric facility. These sorts of things, as I say, are one-offs that that really constitute a project and leads to the uncertainty and challenges with it. Oftentimes, projects violate established practices. We have to do things different in order to make this project work, and it generally upsets the status quo. Those are all things that send the spidey sensors up for particular projects, that get people a little bit anxious, because there are so many unknowns, and unless there's good planning, those unknowns could seriously derail a project. Projects are often compared to normal processes that business do. And if we look at like a normal business, what type of processes? Repeat. A process involves doing the same thing over and over again. We've done it lots. We know what works, what doesn't work. So a process operation, building airplanes, for example, every plane that comes down the line is a copy of one another. Pretty easy to do. When you put a new airplane into the mix, we haven't done that before. Processes tend to have several objectives, but they're well defined. There's ongoing relationships. There's no real end to it. It's a continuous thing. People tend to be focused on that particular process. So, everyone has a role. They're clear what the role is. It's homogeneous. Well-established systems are in place through experience. There's certainty in terms of performance, cost, schedule, these sorts of things. It becomes part of the operation of the business. It is very much part of the line organization, and it all supports established practices of the organization, really supports the status quo. So we can see that projects are very different than normal processes. So you need to be aware of what the key characteristics of the project, of a project or the project would be. Projects are one-off, they're unique. Every project is different, but every project needs a well-defined objective. What are we doing here? And let's keep our eye on that. Projects are temporary. There's a defined end date. This project will begin and end on a certain day or certain year or certain point in time. It's clear. A project drives change. A project is all about doing things differently. It enables value creation through that change. So a project is initiated to bring about change in order to meet a need, a new desire. Its purpose is to achieve specific objectives, which changes the context of the current state. We're doing things differently. And that uncertainty, the goal is to bring us to that desired future state, but there's a lot of uncertainty there. And as a result, that uncertainty is what creates a risk. A project is developed using progressive elaboration. In other words, we build on it like a snowball. We make it bigger and bigger. Projects are often defined broadly when they begin, and as time passes, specific details of the project become clearer. Therefore, projects should be developed in increments, slowly moving along. Project team should develop initial plans and update them with more details as new information arrives. A project requires resources. Resources is a fancy name for money, people, effort. Resources include people, hardware, software, other assets. Many projects cross departmental and other boundaries to achieve their unique purposes. So, for example, IT projects, people from IT, people from marketing, people from sales, people from distribution, other business components will be involved, and they all have to be integrated. A project should have a primary customer or sponsor. Someone's going to benefit from this at the end. Who is that customer? Who is the delivery going to? So most projects have many interested parties or stakeholders, but the success of the project really depends on that customer being happy at the end of it. And a project comes naturally because of all those uncertainties with uncertainty. And the uniqueness of it, the fact that it's under a time gun, these things bring uncertainty. And external factors, stuff that we have no control over, can certainly add to that uncertainty. There are lots of organizations around that do a lot of work with regards to managing projects. If we look at the Project Management Institute, this is their website, for example, they focus on educating and working with people who are in the project management business. What are some of the constraints that all projects have? And these are common. Every project is constrained. The scope, the time, and the cost goals tend to be key constraints. Okay, if we think about scope, for example, what work has to be done? Are we clear of what the end game is. What is the work that needs to be done? If it's a unique project, service, or result, does the customer or sponsor expect? What do they want? What are they getting? How will the scope be verified? How are we going to make sure that we've met what we said we're going to do? In terms of time, how long should it take to complete the project? There's so many unknowns, it's very difficult to be able to pin down an exact time, but we want to be able to frame it somehow or another. So what's the project schedule? How will the team track that schedule? How do we know we're on schedule, for example? And how can we make changes in the schedule? And what impact does that have on everything else? And cost is probably the one that always comes down to be one of the key ones, is how do we track the cost of the project? How do we make sure we're not going over budget? You know, if we expect it to cost a certain amount, how do we keep it within that certain amount? And tracking costs and analyzing costs and making sure that costs are managed by, you know, having proper authorization for people to be able to spend money is important too. So we've got this scope, cost, goal, and these are often called the real 3 criteria that we look at in terms of project constraints. You know, those are the 3 major aspects. How big is it, the scope, how much it's going to cost, and how long it's going to take. So we've got, generally we can think of a project creating a couple of key issues that we need to look at. There's technical issues, which is relating to the actual nuts and bolts, the time, the money, these sorts of things, what the project's going to look like. That's a technical end. But there's also other ends, and those other ends are more human. They're called sociocultural. They're more dealing with leadership or problem solving or teamwork, negotiation. These sorts of things come into play. So there's the mechanical, technical, engineering type things, plus the people, human resource type things that we need to concern ourselves with in every single project. In fact, when we think of a project manager and a project management framework, the project manager must realize that we have these couple of different issues that we are looking at in terms of, you know, broad issues, and we need to be able to weigh those out. So project management then really focuses on applying the knowledge, the skills, the tools, and techniques to the project in order to meet the requirements. So a project manager must be able to have knowledge in terms of technical and human aspects, the social cultural ones as well. So if we look at a project, really we could break it down in really 10 project knowledge areas. And these knowledge areas will fall into one category or the other, meaning that they're major human focused or meaning that they're engineering or technical type focus. So we think about the things like the scope, the schedule, the cost, the quality, the resources that we put into it, the communications, the risk, the procurement, buying stuff, and stakeholders all play into the things that need to be managed, and those are key knowledge elements that every person who is involved in managing a project would need to be able to be aware of. If we think about the stakeholders, we ask ourselves, well, who exactly are the stakeholders? Well, they're the people involved in or affected by the project. They include the project sponsor who's building it, the project team, the people working at it, the support staff that support the project team, the customers, the users, the suppliers, and even opponents of the project, people who are dead set against it. These stakeholders have very different needs, very different wants, and would ask very different questions. If we give an example of a home construction, for example, something pretty simple, you know, a home would have project sponsors, and really that would be the homeowners. Those are the people who the home is being built for. So they're going to be interested to get a house that they want. The banks and financial institutions, they're going to be a very important stakeholder. They're the people that's going to help pay for this up front, right? Unless someone's independently wealthy, they're going to be going looking for financing for a house. The project manager would be more or less the general contractor who's responsible for all the trades: carpentry, piping, plumbing, electrical, all of these sorts of things. We could also have potential project opponents. I don't want you to build a house there. I don't want that house. If you're going to a neighborhood where people, for example, may not want to see the type of house that you're building being built there. Suppliers are going to have an important role. Those are the people that are going to supply the lumber and supply the materials. That's going to be. And obviously, probably most important are the people who are actually going to do the work, the tradespeople, the carpenters, the pipe fitters, the plumbers, the electricians. These people are going to be important stakeholders in the process as the home gets constructed. Just circling back to the project management knowledge areas, we really need to think about, as a project manager, what do you need to be able to bring to the table? Well, we've looked at that already, and now we're just going to summarize it. We're going to say, well, okay, you as a project manager would have to manage the scope of the project. How big is this? When is it going to be done? What constitutes completion? You got to define and manage all the work that's required in order to bring the project to a successful conclusion. We also got schedule management. Someone's got to make sure that this thing's on schedule. It includes estimating how long it will take to complete the work, what stuff needs to be done first, what needs to be done second, what needs to be done third, how long is it going to take to do each of those steps. And we need to ensure, ultimately, getting the project finished on a reasonable time. Project cost management comes into play, making sure that the budget is kept to. We can't have an infinite supply of money in order to do something. Project quality, we want to make sure that the project meets the standard that the customer or the person who is being delivered to desires. Certainly, quality would be an important thing we need to manage. And resource management. Do we have the right people, the right materials, the right place? All of that, is it there at the right time in order to be able to put the house together? The communications management. Generating, collecting, disseminating important information. That project manager needs to do that. Risk assessment. What are some of the potential risks that project manager has to identify? For example, if you're building a house and you lay building materials out around the house, is there a risk that it might get stolen? Is there some sort of security? Can the house blow down in an extreme wind event? These are all things that risk analysis would look at. So that project manager would have to look at it and say, what are some of the things I can do in order to reduce the risk here? We also have project stakeholder management, which includes identifying who all the stakeholders are that we just talked about in the previous slide, and identifying what their needs are and making sure those needs are met. And finally, we've got this integration concept. We need project integration. And that's the overarching function that allows all of the other parts to talk to one another so people can use all of the information to complete the project for the customer. So what exactly does project managers actually do? If we think about some of the more operational things that to do at each of those stages. In terms of integration management, project selection materials, project management methodologies, stakeholder analysis, work requests, project charters, project management plans, change control boards, project review meetings. These are all things that are important for integration management. Sometimes they use project management software to do that. Sometimes there are more paper-based systems, but effectively those systems would be systems that allow for the project to move ahead in an orderly fashion. In terms of scope management, we've got to think about what exactly is the statement of work. What are we building here? And how do we ensure that we're within those plans? And do we verify, and how can we verify that those plans are being met? And what do we do in order to manage change that? What kind of scope change? So from a tools point of view on the far right there, we look at scope statements, which are just written statements. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to build a house on this street. The house will be this big. Work breakdown structures breaks down each element. Okay, the carpenters are going to come in. They're going to finish the work by now, and then the electricians are going to come in. So we effectively break down the work into its subcomponents. And the requirements analysis. When do we need carpenters? When do we need plumbers to come in? When do we need the electricians to come in? What is the timing on that? In terms of schedule management, that naturally flows out of that. We look at project network diagrams being used. Sometimes there's something called a critical path analysis, which does an assessment of all the individual tasks and how they should be ordered in order to complete the project by a certain date. So for example, you can't put the roof on before you build the walls, okay? So you need to do that first. We need to think about how long it takes to do those things before you get to the roof. Crashing is a terminology that's used in terms of the critical path analysis. It's terminology, it's not literally crashing. What we're trying to do is there to figure out what time frame does it take to do each individual task, consider the order that those time frames operate in, and figure out the shortest possible time that we could complete the whole project. And things like fast tracking, how can we speed things up? And performance measurements. Oftentimes we use something called a Gantt chart, which is a graphical tool that illustrates the critical path analysis showing what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, where it is relative to the entire project. In terms of cost management, we've got our budgets, obviously. We use the time value of money in terms of net present value. $1 a day is not worth as much next year. We have to think, what is the full cost going to be if it's going to be completed next year? Return on investment, if it costs us a lot of money to put there, when do we expect to get our money back? Is that the best option? Payback analysis, how long will it take for this to pay for itself? Earned value management, does the project cover the cost of its operation? And so all of these, portfolio management in terms of the cost estimating, cost management plans, cost baselines, which are what we expect, the minimum cost of doing things. All of those are good tools that a manager would employ in order to be able to manage the cost of a project. In terms of quality, we have quality metrics, which are just basically the standards that we expect to apply. Checklists, do we have this done? Do we have that done? Quality control charts, which are looking at each project and saying, does it meet a certain standard? Pareto diagrams are just diagrams, are physical, I'll call it a graphical representation of the quality control issues that you could look at. Fishbone diagrams is like a flow chart. Maturity models, when things come to, when they are complete. Statistical methodology, and test plans. In terms of communication management, we're looking at all the tools that you would use as a manager in order to help the communication process. So management plans, conflict management tools, techniques, media selection, what's the best way to get information out, status reports, updates, virtual communications, using standard templates to be able to get information out, project websites. These would be followed up in terms of the tools, kickoff meetings, which are meetings that would be held at the beginning of the project, and ongoing meetings would give what's called progress reports. In terms of risk, we look at risk management plans, so anticipating what the risks are within the plans, risk registers, what are some of the issues of risk, let's write them down. Probability impact metrics, which is really looking at, well, what is the probability of an event happening versus how much impact will that have on the overall project if it were to happen? And be able to rank a risk, what are the most important risks, which are the least unlikely. In terms of procurement management, make or buy analysis, should we make it, buy it? Contracts, subcontracts in particular. Requests for proposals, quotes on projects in order to be able to get the lowest price. Sourcing our selections, and supplier evaluation. What do we do in order to make sure the supplier can do the job as promised? So all of those are really important tools, and I've just re-summarized them here in terms of going out in terms of project tools and techniques, is being able to gather data, analyze the data, represent the data in some way or another so that you can read it, people can see it, making decisions based on the data, communicating the data, being able to work with people, the interpersonal and team skills, and being able to employ a whole bunch of other tools, and there's an infinite number of other tools that can be used to be able to help us be able to schedule things and move projects forward. What do we do in order to measure success? Well, if we look at success, we looked at those issues of scope, time, and cost, and we need to be able to make sure that when our project is completed, or if it's along the way, that the scope of the project is within the bounds, time is within the bounds, and the cost is within the bounds. Ultimately, we ask ourselves, is the customer satisfied with the project once it's complete? And, is it meeting its main objective? On the right there, what helps project success? So we look at some of the things that are key contributors to project success. Someone responsible for it, executive sponsorship, someone who's a champion for your project, emotional maturity. Can the people get along well together? Again, that's more of a human resource issue. User involvement, human resource issue. Are they engaged in the process? Is it optimized? Are there skilled resources? Is it an agile process, meaning that it can change quickly? Can it be executed relatively easily? Do we have a lot of expertise to be able to bring to the project? And do we have some clear business goals? So we see that a project manager is multi-talented, multifaceted. They have to do a lot of things well. They use a wide variety of skills. They figure out which skills are best for a given project and be able to employ those skills in order to manage that project. They gotta have good general management skills, not only in terms of finance and accounting, but in terms of people as well. And they must be intelligent and experienced enough to know how projects should move ahead and where we are with it. So it's a learn as you go type business. They gotta have good HR skills, and they have to be able to wrap their heads around the technology that is being employed. So that constitutes really the material in that first chapter. I want you to read over that material in chapter 1, plus the material that is covered in unit 1 of the course. Thanks. As usual, if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm Paul Tilley. See you next week.